The Battle of Nu'uanu is arguably one of the most well-known battles fought in Hawaiian history. Kamehameha knew it was time to try and take control of all of the islands, and swiftly he gathered a great fleet of canoes, thousands of warriors, and a group of foreign artillerymen headed by Isaac Davis and John Young. The time was February of 1795. He attacked first Maui, then Molokai. For the attack on Oahu, the long line of canoes extended along the shore from the present Waialae Golf Course to Waikiki. Here, Kamehameha grouped his forces for the attack on Kalani'u-Pule, who had taken positions in Nu'uanu Valley. Adding strength to Kalani'u-Pule's army were the chief Ka'iana, his brother Nahi'olea, and their close friends and followers. They had all deserted Kamehameha after the voyage from Hawaii had begun. The Battle of Nu'uanu, in April of 1795, is one of the greatest stories in Hawaii's history. The beautiful valley, once filled with the shouts of warriors, is now a favorite spot of visitors and residents. The outcome of the battle, according to Fornander, was as follows. At Puiva, the hostile forces met, and for a while the victory was hotly contested, but the superiority of Kamehameha's artillery, the number of his guns, and the better practice of his soldiers soon turned the day in his favor. Of the Oahu forces who were not killed, some escaped up the sides of the mountains that enclosed the valley on either side, while a large number were driven over the pali of Nu'uanu, several hundred feet in height, and perished miserably. Ka'iana and his brother Nahi'olea were killed early in the battle. Ka'ulaokani, the brother of Kalani'u-Pule, escaped to Kauai. Kalani'u-Pule was hotly pursued, but he escaped in the jungle and for several months lived in the mountain range that separates Ko'olaupoko from Ewa, until finally he was captured in the upper portion of Waipi'o, killed, brought to Kamehameha, and sacrificed to the war god Ku Ka'ilimoku. The Battle of Nu'uanu was a turning point in Hawaiian history, but it did not lead immediately to the firm unification of the islands. Revolts broke out from time to time, and the island of Kauai was still independent. However, it was only a matter of time until Kamehameha would become the single ruler of the whole island chain. Although the bitter wars among the chiefs had now come to an end, a new influence was at work in the islands. This new influence would change Hawaiian life and customs. Increasingly, during the civil wars, haole from many countries had visited or moved to the islands, and these changes that they brought during the last years of Kamehameha's reign are what we will discuss next. After the Battle of Nu'uanu, Kamehameha's great task was to unite and improve his new kingdom. He based his government largely on the old Hawaiian land system. He rewarded his main chiefs with grants of land, and they collected taxes in the traditional way, receiving food and other gifts from the commoners. In 1796, Kamehameha gathered his canoes at Waianae and set forth to conquer Kauai. In mid-channel, a great storm sank many of his canoes and forced him to give up the attempt. Several months later, he quickly smashed a revolt that broke out on the island of Hawaii. This was Kamehameha's last important military action. Now he was free to take on his new role as an administrator. He kept some of the more restless chiefs near his court. He made others, whom he trusted completely, governors of the various islands. John Young became governor of the island of Hawaii. Ke'eaumoku became governor of Maui. At court, Kamehameha depended greatly on the powerful Kona chiefs and their sons and on Kalanimoku, also known as the Iron Cable of Hawaii. Kalanimoku's ability led admiring English sailors to name him after their own prime minister, William Pitt. They called Kalanimoku Billy Pitt. Kamehameha strictly enforced the kapu system, believing that it strengthened his control. One of his first projects was to rebuild his war-torn land. He set his people to work terracing hills, banking up taro patches, digging long irrigation ditches, and building fish ponds. The king himself took an active part in these public works. Captain Archibald Campbell, in his description of Hawaii about 1810, mentions seeing Kamehameha deep in the mud of a taro patch. This mode of culture is particularly laborious, and in all the operations those engaged are almost constantly up to the middle in mud. I have often seen the king working hard in a taro patch. I know not whether this was done with a view of setting an example of industry to his subjects. Such exertion could scarcely be thought necessary among these islanders, who are certainly the most industrious people I ever saw. In the time of Kamehameha's reign, trade with foreigners had increased greatly. When Captain Cook's journals were published in 1784, the world learned of the wealth of China and of the Pacific Northwest, which included present-day Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. British traders exploited the fur resources, using the furs to pay for tea and other goods purchased in China. Up to 1791, nearly all the ships arriving in Hawaii were those of British fur traders. Soon after gaining independence, Americans entered the Pacific fur trade. By 1810, they controlled most of the fur trade between the northwest coast and Canton, China. After the Revolutionary War, Americans were cut off from their normal markets in the British Empire and had little silver or few goods to trade. They wanted the tea, cotton cloth, and silk of China, but they needed something they could give the Chinese merchants in return. The Chinese were willing to pay well for furs, and this led the Americans to enter the fur trade in competition with traders of several nations. Soon after the fur trade began, ships began to stop at the Hawaiian Islands for many reasons. First, supplies in the amount needed for ships were not available along the west coast. Second, captains needed men for their ships, and Hawaiians were excellent seamen. Third, fresh fruits and vegetables available in the islands were necessary to prevent scurvy. Fourth, the islands offered a convenient place to refit ships. And fifth, after 1805, few ships were able to complete their trading in one summer because of the increasing scarcity of furs and sea otter skins. Sailors were more willing to sign on for the longer journeys if they knew that the ship would winter in the Sandwich Islands. In the early 1800s, most of the ships that stopped in the islands carrying furs were American. These early traders obtained food, water, firewood, and salt for curing hides. In the early days of the fur trade, islanders were eager to exchange their goods for a few scraps of iron and nails. Before the islands were united, their chiefs got arms and ammunition in exchange for their goods. After the unification, cloth became the main item of exchange. The islanders quickly became skillful at bargaining and steadily raised their prices. The Russian world traveler Lysyansky wrote that a small pig cost him an iron axe. 100 pounds of sweet potatoes cost 3 yards of linen, while a small knife was the price of a fowl. Originally, the ships traveled around Cape Horn and into the Pacific, going either directly to the islands or first to the northwest. After a while, the traders learned that they could earn high profits by carrying on smuggling operations with the Spanish settlements in California and Mexico. At times, they supplied the Russian outpost in Alaska and Kamchatka in Russia, taking fur in exchange. By 1812, they added sandalwood from the Hawaiian and Marquesas Islands to their cargoes of furs. And after the Spanish colonies on the Pacific coast became independent, the Americans traded with them.